My name is Lisa Flaherty, and I'm interviewing Sarah Baugh for Georgia State University's Women's March Oral History Project. The date is July 6, 2018, and the interview is taking place in Athens, Georgia. All right, Miss Sarah, what year were you born?
1981.
And tell us a little bit about the family you grew up in, and where you grew up.
I grew up in central New York, and my father is a cabinet maker and my mother is a nurse. And I have two siblings. I'm a middle child, and Roman Catholic Yankees. So.
All right. So did your family have any political leanings, or did they talk about politics when you were growing up?
Yes, I think my father tends Republican. And I remember there being a lot of controversy during Bill Clinton's election, or campaign, I should say, where my mother was voting for Bill Clinton and my father was not. I think he claimed he didn't have a political affiliation, but if I had to guess, he was a Republican. So my mother is from Vermont, and Vermonters are a specific kind of people, and they tend to kind of go their own way, but based on the pictures I saw from college, she was a long-haired hippie. So yes, she was much more of a bleeding heart liberal, and my father was, I think, a big believer in keeping what he had. His parents were factory workers, and nobody had a college education in his family, and I think probably maintaining the wealth you accumulated was top of his priority list.
Do you remember any particular topics within that?
I don't really. I know that religion and politics were kind of controversial topics within my home. And so not especially when I became politically active in high school, or rather socially active with issues that were important to me. They tolerated them, but I know they had a lot of concerns. So there was nothing clear or straightforward about my family's political beliefs.
Well, you said you had high school. You started taking note of these things. What were some of the topics that struck you?
I was a sort of unusual high school student, and I was deeply invested in anti-death penalty work. So I am a lapsed Catholic now, but at the time I was Catholic, and a big believer in the flawed nature of the death penalty, and then eventually had pen pals on death row, which might not have been a great idea for a high school student. My parents did object to that when they found out, and was frequently out in front of the cathedral on weekends protesting with other people. So at the time, Dead Man Walking came out, and I got an important person whose name completely escapes my memory because I am 37 now, but to come to my high school to speak, and then had to have it be balanced. And so I also had the assistant district attorney come and speak about the death penalty. It was a good education. You assume young people are of one mind, and they weren't. And I was startled, I remember at the time, that what seemed clear-cut to me was not clear-cut to my classmates. So, but yes, I've always been a person who becomes, I have trouble looking away when I see a problem.
Well, so you're a teenager, you're invested in the death penalty. Who are the people that share your beliefs around you? So when you're protesting and when you're out in front of the church, who's with you? Are there other children from high school, or?
There was my best friend. We were both politically active, and that was basically it. Occasionally members, upstate New York is, New York trends blue, but central New York is fairly rural, and so I would say, for the home parish I was part of, St. Mary's was not a particularly progressive. The Catholic Church in general, historically speaking, aside from its terrible transgressions, has also been one of the most, civil liberties minded. They tend to believe in good works, and so some Catholic churches have a lot of political action in them, and my home parish was definitely not one of them. It was a very traditional, mostly older folks, not a lot of young, fired up people. And to be honest, I was one of the only fired up people in my community. But my best friend and I were definitely both angry about it and wanted to do something. And truth be told, the naivete of youth made us believe that that was a possibility, that we could, if we just explained it clearly enough, convince the people around us. So it was mostly other people within the central New York community that would be out there at the protests, but it was not like they were friends. In hindsight, I'm a little startled, because I was a very shy person, that I had the chutzpah to stand out there. But that tends to be the way I operate. I want to stand back until until I don't, and then I'm like, wait a second. So yeah.
Do you actively vote?
I do actively vote, yes.
And did that start as a teenager, or was that something that you grew into?
No, I've voted since I was legally able to vote. If I'm honest, I probably have skipped midterm and local elections in times I shouldn't have. I have a lot more awareness now of the fact that we start at, the local community, and it builds, and without the stability of having elected representatives that do represent your community, the chain goes up. And so I don't think I realized that at the time. I think I took for granted a lot of things, and I don't now. So that has changed.
So you had the activism in high school. Did you take it to college with you?
I didn't actually go to college.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's not true. I was in and out of prerequisites for nursing school. I was going to be a midwife at one point. But I definitely, there was a lull in sort of fledging the nest, leaving home. I moved from New York to Athens, and no, I mean, I recall being involved in a mayoral, volunteering to canvass and sign people up to vote for a mayoral election when I first moved to Athens. But aside from that, no, I wasn't particularly, I think I was so sort of bogged down by the needing to feed yourself and, get a job and learn how to be a functional adult that, and also, I think probably thinking that there were adults that were in charge, that there was some mature group of people that had things under control, and I wasn't yet one of them, and so I didn't need to stress. I certainly voted, but I didn't pay close attention in the way I do now.
All right, so tell us about your profession. So you came to Athens,
Mm-hmm.
And is that when you began nursing?
No, I'm not a nurse. Yeah, no. I've had a long and winding path. I came to Athens actually to be a rock star, which is funny, but that didn't quite pan out, as it doesn't for most people. And we picked Athens because it was the home of REM and the B-52s, and it was a great size, and I was a vegetarian. It was like the place to come. So, and then I planned, at some point, got the birth bug, and wanted to be a home birth midwife and then a certified nurse midwife. Started my prerequisites for nursing school, finished most of them, and then in the process met my husband, got married, had a baby, and she kind of changed everything. So, as they do. And made me realize that midwifery was probably not the right career choice for me, given how much people care about their babies. I didn't know if I wanted responsibility for being the gatekeeper, so to speak. So, yeah, I am a professional photographer. I'm a portrait photographer. So, and I've had my business for let's see, 8 years now, and I love my job. It's a good one.
All right, fantastic. So, with your present job, tell us a little bit about your favorite parts of it, and perhaps your not so much favorite parts of it, and how it's kind of impacted how you view things.
Well, I almost exclusively photograph families and young children, and I don't photograph weddings, so my sphere is kind of contained. I love meeting people. My favorite part of my job is actually photographing the connection between humans, specifically parents and their children. I don't do a lot of very posed portraiture, so I'm looking to have parents and their children interact with each other, and then I want to catch it. And so I love meeting them. I love sort of being allowed into, people kind of forget I'm there to some extent. I'm a service employee in some ways, so I become invisible in a way that's very, very nice because I get to really catch things sometimes. So, and then I really, really love going home, offloading photographs off of my camera onto my computer, and then seeing what I got. And so there's the pleasure of actually shooting the session and then actually seeing what I really have and editing. And then, of course, it's really, really fun to send pictures off to the clients, and I get to help parents see their children in a new light, see themselves in a new light. Makes me really happy when, especially women, who often have a lot of difficulty being in front of a camera, will feel joy when they see pictures of themselves taken by somebody who A, knows what they're doing, and B, cares about, I think, the important things.
So, to jump forward to right before the march, how did you find out about the march?
Well, in the aftermath of the election, I feel like there was not any part of my life that wasn't sort of touched by what felt kind of catastrophic, if I'm honest. That probably sounds hyperbolic, but it didn't feel like it at the time. It was startling, which maybe is a symptom of a larger naivete, but there wasn't really anybody in my community who wasn't talking about the election. And so I don't know where I heard about the march, probably through Facebook, but all of my closest friends are engaged citizens, so if it wasn't through Facebook, it was through one of them.
So when did you make the decision that you might want to go? And which march did you go to, perhaps? Who asked that one first?
I went to the one in D.C.
Okay.
And it was actually my friend Kate and her sister. They decided to go, and Kate lives here and Jen lives in Statesboro, and they decided to go, and I was honestly afraid to go. I'm not a person who likes crowds. I felt like the nation was in such turmoil that it was going to be dangerous. But there was something about the fact that Kate, who is this very steady, sensible human being, was going to go that made it feel like I could. And then there was this huge part of me that felt like the veil had been pulled away from my eyes after the election, and that I think I'm not the only person who feels this way. It felt as though pre-President Trump, that we were in the Wizard of Oz and there was someone behind the curtain, and the powers at large were not going to let catastrophe happen. I don't know who I thought those people were, but I thought there was someone, apparently. And so then there seemed to be a lot of personal responsibility that just kind of arrived in everybody's lap afterwards. Like, oh, nobody's going to fix this. If it's not me, then who is it? And I'm the mother of 2 daughters, and one of my daughters is black, And I feel as though it's my job as their mother to protect them. And I suddenly felt very acutely that I lived in a country that I didn't know I lived in, and that it was my job to do whatever I could to make it safe for my girls to grow up. So, yeah, Kate going made me decide, okay, I can do this. Once I researched the march and saw that it was an organized event, it wasn't just chaos that was going to be landed on Washington, D.C., that there were people who were, because the reality is a huge group of people can be dangerous. And so once I saw that this was a march with a plan, I was like, okay, I can do this.
Had you ever marched before?
Yes. Yes, I had in Athens. Like Take Back the Night, and but never anything like this.
What was the experience on the Take Back the Night march or some of the other ones?
That was, truth be told, Take Back the Night, which it's sort of funny to imagine how you stop sexual assault with marching. Because how do you stop sexual assault with marching? So even then I recall being like, why are we marching? But there is something cathartic about being with a group of people who see that there's a problem and want to do something about it, even though you're not necessarily sure what it's going to do. So in Athens, any kind of political action has in the past felt pretty scattershot, and Take Back the Night was no exception. Primarily university folks and not a huge group of people kind of wandering through campus. So well-meaning is the way I would describe it.
Okay, so you and your friend have decided you're going to go to DC. What about the logistics? What was that process of just getting yourself from here to there?
Well, we gathered more friends, because heck, if we're going to squeeze ourselves into a Prius, we're going to squeeze as many people as we can into a Prius. So there were 5 of us, and we drove down to Statesboro, got in another larger vehicle, and then with all 5 of us. And then Kate, who, again, did I mention she's a really steady, amazing person? She's awesome. She had a friend who actually, I want to say she might be a lobbyist in D.C., but had an apartment in D.C., was leaving for the weekend, and said that we could stay there. And so that was really helpful, because finding somewhere to be in D.C. was almost impossible at that point. So it kind of felt like everything fell into place. And we had somewhere to park. We were close enough to where the march was going to be setting off that we could park in the apartment's parking lot and just walk there. We didn't have to worry about public transportation. Like, a lot of the pieces that made logistics of the march more complicated were taken care of, thanks to Kate. So I think that definitely played a part in being a person who's sort of risk averse, making the decision to go and do that.
The other 3 people that were in the car, besides you and Kate, did you know them very well?
Yes. Kate's sister is the one I knew the least, but we still knew each other. I photographed her wedding, actually. And yes, they were all dear friends.
So what was the conversation like as you drove up to DC?
It was jovial, because we're all friends and we were all knitting pussy hats the entire time. So we're frantically knitting the backseat. We made a lot of them. And then as we got closer, it became, we stopped in North Carolina to eat lunch, and there were TVs on, and it was a pretty conservative little community in North Carolina. And we stopped and got sandwiches, and on I think CNN, or I don't know what news channel it was on, but there was footage of Black Bloc rioting, if you want to call it that. I don't know if the scale is commensurate with the word riot, but let's go with it. And then the police reaction to them. And at that point, it kind of became real what we were doing, and the fact that this did involve, I mean, it felt scarier. Like, I know that there felt like a big cloud kind of descended, because this was not a pleasure trip at all. Like, none of us had lives that we could easily leave for a weekend. All of us have young children, except for Jen, and Jen has a busy life and career. And so I know for some people, it's like a bonding experience. We're going to go do this thing, and it didn't feel that way at all. It felt like a necessary thing that we were doing because we felt like we didn't have a choice. And definitely a couple of the friends that went with us, I don't really think that they were particularly politically active before this point, and it felt like something that they even felt like they needed to go. So it got kind of, not grim, but more serious the closer we got there, and we were like, okay, we're doing this.
As you were driving up, you mentioned that all but one of you had children.
Mm-hmm.
Did you discuss how you told your children? I mean, when you were leaving, what did you tell your children? Did any of you discuss how you broached that? And how did you tell your daughters you were going? What did you tell them?
Well, I don't know if we discussed, I mean, we certainly were talking about, like, all of us have partners that are perfectly capable of taking care of their own children, and so, like, yes, obviously. But there was definitely discussion of how we were leaving our children, and there was discussion about the fact that some families were bringing their children to the march, because there were children at the march, and it didn't feel like a safe thing for me to do. My youngest is 5 and my eldest is 12, so make them slightly younger at that point. I definitely talked to my elder daughter about all of it. We have a pretty open relationship with communication, and the night of the election, which isn't a lot of fun to think about, but we had bought like celebratory party treats and sparkling apple cider, and I'm sorry, it feels very silly that it makes me misty, but the excitement of having a woman elected president was like, it felt so big, so big. And then when things started to turn, and was it the New York Times slider that like indicated the likelihood as the night went on, and when it started to go the wrong direction, we went to bed. So we were like, nope, have to go to bed. And so she woke up the morning after the election afraid, to be very honest with you, because she, despite being in a pretty insulated bubble, we try to protect her from the darkest parts of the world, but she had heard parts of what candidate Trump had said, and she had seen concern within our community about immigrants. She had seen the upticks in conversations about humans being illegal, about race. Like, people came out of the woodwork and felt free to say things they hadn't felt free to say before. And I can't protect her from all of those things, nor should I, because other children don't get that. So she did hear. We tried to make it really clear that all of the adults were going to do their part to make sure things were okay, and that the system of checks and balances exists for a reason. We have a well-designed democracy. It's going to be okay. He's not king. It's going to be okay. Even though we didn't necessarily believe what we were saying, it's your job as a parent to reassure your children. And so I wanted both of my kids to see that I am a high school graduate who stays at home with her children and works in my own small business, and yet I will still go and make my voice heard, and that I do have power, and I will use it. So she was really proud of me. And I know I was going with her blessing. My younger daughter didn't really have any concept of what was going on, just that I was leaving and that she wasn't pleased about that. But we definitely all talked about our children in that I think in the back of everyone's head there was a minute possibility we might not come back. And that it still felt like something that we had to do anyway. That probably sounds alarmist, but it felt so much like a pressure cooker in the country that I didn't know if someone was going to drive a truck into traffic, if there were going to be people out there with weapons. Like, it seemed very possible and still necessary.
So, when did you arrive in D.C.?
We arrived the night before the march, late, because we drove it all in one fell swoop. I think probably, maybe it was 6 p.m., 7 p.m., I can't really remember. And found ourselves places to sleep. I don't recall if we ate anything. We were all pretty nervous, I think, at that point.
And so you said you were able to walk there. So where did you find yourself once you got out of the apartment?
It was interesting watching from the apartment windows, like starting to see people trickle, and you didn't know until you got there how much of a symbol the pink hats were going to be, and then it was like, oh, look, like all of these men and women walking down the street in these hats, and it felt like that was an unexpectedly sort of, they're such silly hats, but they took on a life of their own, and they had power there as a symbol. So we saw people walking, and then when we got ourselves all together, we walked kind of following the crowds. By the time we got there, it was difficult to find out where you were supposed to be. And we ended up, if you look at the aerial photographs, there's the stage, and we were on the road with the stage. You'd think I'd know the names of these streets, but I don't. And there were periodically big screens with speakers, and we were just before the first speaker. So we could see the stage from where we were standing, but not necessarily hear very well. We've all talked about since then, like, had we realized it, we would have tried to get ourselves back further. But there was no moving once you got in there at all. So it was like nothing I've ever seen in my life. Probably won't ever see anything like it again.
Well, that's my next question. Why don't you describe where you found yourself? I mean,
yeah. So we got into the kind of the center, and then people just kept coming. And I give DC and the organizers a lot of credit. I think they did their very best. I don't think anybody understood how many people were going to show up. So, I don't like crowds. Did I mention that? And then I was in the very center of a crowd of really kind of insane proportions. And you couldn't move pretty much at all. And you didn't really have any sense of where you were, because there were so many people that you really kind of didn't know where you were. And there was no phone service because the cell towers were all jammed, so you couldn't get a signal at all, which was like, okay, all right, I understand why this is happening, but also this makes me nervous. One of our party was attempting, her sister had come from another part of the country, and there was a point when they thought they could find each other, and we did spend some time looking for her sister, which it was clear very quickly that that wasn't really possible. But once we kind of found a place and stayed put, and then the actual speakers started, and that all feels pretty surreal. honestly. Partially because of the distance between like us and the stage, and the sort of immediacy of the humans around us. We could hear them and they said amazing things, but it all feels in hindsight almost like it didn't happen because it was so strange. And beautiful and heartbreaking and scary, kind of all at the same time. I know we all really needed to pee at some point, despite being no doubt dehydrated, but there wasn't really any way to leave. And that became a kind of scary situation. And at some point, the march was supposed to begin, and what we didn't know, because we were at the very front, like we were so close to the stage, relatively speaking, that we didn't realize how many people were behind us and winding. So we thought, we couldn't figure out why the march wasn't starting, like why the actual moving wasn't beginning. And nor did anybody around us, nor were there enough people to communicate why, what the problem was going on. And so there were all these new speakers being added and musicians being added kind of to the roster that were not part of the planned lineup. And the reality is they were trying to keep us occupied because they knew that the beginning of the march had begun, but to get this wave of humans moving was taking a long time. So there started to be an element of panic in the crowd. People started to get anxious. Heck knows I was anxious because you couldn't leave if you wanted to. And people started to get kind of hot and faint. And that was scary. And humans being humans, we all have that kind of animal bits of our brain that don't react appropriately in... I mean, it's an understandable reaction, and so I would not have blamed anybody. But there did become this point where it felt like... I mean, I know I started to make aggressively friendly conversation with strangers around me in order to calm myself. Like, hello, these are other humans. They are not the other. They are real. They have names. Where are you from? So, yeah, that part was the most tense part before we actually began moving.
Can you tell me about some of those conversations?
There were people from everywhere. And that was really neat. And there was a lot of rumor afterwards about how people who had opposing viewpoints were not respected there. And I felt kind of angry about that because I saw there was a large group of people over on the left-hand side that had very clear anti-choice, a giant anti-choice banner, and they were all wearing t-shirts. And they were just as tolerated as everybody else. Nobody bothered them. They were allowed to be there just as long as they weren't bothering anybody else. Like, you're allowed to be there. So I watched with my own eyes people be very respectful of the fact that the reality is not all of us were there for the same reasons. Like, it was a wide variety of reasons we were there. And my reasons and their reasons were both valid. So, there were people from DC, there were a lot of young people. It was a very diverse crowd, which sort of, I wasn't sure if it would be, but it was. It was mostly women. The perhaps inappropriate part of my brain says that the reason it was as peaceful as it was is because it was majority women. And we have a calming effect. We were able to keep ourselves in check. So, yeah, there were a lot of really great signs. That was fun, getting to see all of the amazing signs.
Did you have one?
No, I did not. In fact, none of us did. We were all just kind of there with our coats and water and protein bars. And the crowd was so dense that unless you had like a really big stick or some way to hold it, that wasn't really easy to see the signs. But it was really neat when we did eventually end up moving to see all of the really creative people out there.
What kind of, do you remember any of the signs?
Not in the slightest, no. No, I don't remember at all. I know that once we started moving, finally, and then there became enough like breathing room during certain periods that you could see them and being like, wow. And then I remember hearing Madonna start singing. And we have a video of it because it was so weird. Like, there was Madonna, and now she did not behave herself, and she said some things she should not have said, and it was very frustrating because it was like, listen, lady, I realize that you're famous. You need to learn to control your tongue. So her joke about blowing up the White House or something was very like, there was a large groan from the crowd when she said that, because it was like, this gives people license to write us off. And our desire is not violence. Our desire is to have the person who's just been elected understand that we're here and we're watching and we're not going to be quiet. So, but then, you know, she's singing and we're marching while Madonna's singing, which was funny. It was a moment of levity.
So, while you're at the march, what overreaching message did you want the march to send to, and who did you want to send it to?
I wanted to send it to newly elected President Trump, and then I also wanted to send it to the country as a whole. I feel a lot of solace about the fact that the popular vote was still won by Hillary Clinton. I like to imagine I know where I am, and then I didn't wake up in the Twilight Zone, and then I know who my neighbors are. So the time since then has been an education in that way. I feel like we were heard, and getting back to the apartment afterwards completely exhausted and seeing all of the sister marches not only across the country but across the world was an incredible gift, honestly. Like, people who don't have him I mean, the solidarity in that, like the collective global, we're with you, we're here, we're watching, it was a big relief. It was like, okay, it's gonna be all right, we're gonna do this. We're awake now. The alarm clock went off and we're awake. And, you know, we marched past Trump Tower, and there were, on certain conservative news channels, like, stories about how people had littered in the streets, and I was like, no, that wasn't littering, that was very careful placement of signs in front of Trump Tower. Like, that wasn't littering, that was intentional. Or that the trash bins were overflowing, that people were just throwing the trash. Like, no, the city was just overwhelmed. They could not keep up. Like, these were people attempting to throw their trash where they were supposed to throw their trash. I don't know. It was bothersome to hear negativity about the march in the aftermath, because it felt overwhelmingly like power. Like, walking down the street, because eventually the police attempted to, so the original march path did not work. And so they were diverting us. They were breaking us into smaller groups, essentially. And then at some point, it was marching in open traffic. And I remember, like, we're I don't know where we were at that point. We're just going. And we're coming to cross streets where there's lights and the cars are moving, and we're like pausing, and then the march of, you know, whose streets are streets. And then we're crossing the street with all the cars, and it felt pretty crazy. But also, there were all these people in these apartments, these high-rises. I mean, high-rise for DC is not that high, but you get my drift. You know, in their windows with signs, leaning out their windows to shout support. It felt really good and scary, because it was like, it's like we lit a fuse. And I think we have. I think a fuse was lit. So, yeah, I don't think that the intended recipient necessarily got the message, because I think to some extent we hear what we want to hear. But I think everybody else did, including cabinet members and members of Congress. I think they heard us. I think it caused quaking in the boots, because women stood up. So, yeah.
So as you were going up there, you mentioned that you and your friends, and even before you actually left, you said there was some trepidation, and that element of fear that possibly, someone could be harmed. Was there any point in that you changed? Did at any point during the march did you say, okay, I feel better about this, or was that always back in the back of your mind?
Once we were kind of in it, there was a sense of like, well, we're doing this one way or another. So like, come hell or high water, here we are. And so there was sort of a surrender to whatever happens, which is a good place to get to. Once actual movement started, no, there wasn't. There were a few. I mean, we have them here in Athens too. Whenever there's a large protest, somebody with a big sign with a lot of inflammatory things and a bullhorn, and they want you to engage with them. They want you to push. They want you to fight, and you just can't. You ignore it. You ignore them. And so, and it was kind of beautiful whenever one of those people would come out of the blue. People would just march, but surrounding them and drown them out with some message of love. So no, it actually felt really supportive and safe. Like it felt like I watched people need to tie their shoes and people around them would stop so they could tie their shoes safely. Like when you would knock into somebody by accident, you would apologize. There was a real air of civility. It was as though the whole march was a reaction to incivility. Like, no, actually, as a country, we are not this. So no, I didn't feel in danger anymore. I think that violence for the sake of attention, I understand the motivation for it. It got a lot of attention when Black Bloc showed up. Like, they had all eyes on them. And so I get it. But I also get that it becomes very easy to write reasonable people off and there is some element of desire to break things just to break them. So yeah, but largely no, it went away.
Okay. Let me see. How did you guys stay together?
Aside from the one person who did eventually go and meet, they found a meeting place and did meet. We kind of were all hawkishly looking for each other the whole time. And that wasn't that hard. I think there might have been some hanging on to sleeves at certain points because nobody was running. So we stayed in a little tight knot when we were in the really, really big crowd. But it does seem humorous that there was ever a suggestion that you might find another human in that crowd. Or there were so many people there from Athens, like busloads went up. And there was this like question of, maybe I'll see you there, which was ludicrous. There was absolutely no chance that you would have a random sighting with someone you knew. So, no, there was no finding friends.
So, once the march ended, you said you went back to the apartment.
Mm-hmm.
What was the conversation like once you all got back there?
Kind of processing and then also kind of numb because it was so big that emotionally it was so big. It was the most intense thing, aside from giving birth, or adopting my second daughter that I've ever done. And then all of us were, now that we were connected to the internet again, checking, and there was a lot of sharing of, like, we watched the news and we, like, being able to see what we had just been inside of. It's like you were just in a hurricane and you didn't realize how big the hurricane was, and then you get home and you see the news and the weather says that was a really massive hurricane. That was the biggest hurricane there's ever been. So there was a lot of, like, I think we probably did some crying. I don't remember. I know we tried to find dinner and we were too exhausted to do anything that required any brains. A lot of, like, whoa, which never went away. Like, there isn't like a coherent conversation, I feel like, that can be had about the march, because it was so big. And then knowing that back in Athens, like, we had a nice little march here and people showed up. Seeing the little tiny rural communities that are very traditionally conservative have marches, I felt like everybody was lifting DC up that day. So I felt loved in a not specifically directed at me way.
So it was when you went back to the apartment, you started watching the news,
Mm-hmm.
and you got an understanding.
Yes.
I had the same experience too.
Where were you?
DC.
Also DC. Okay, so you get what I'm talking about.
Oh my gosh, yes, I do. Let me see. You said, now, I know as we've talked about it, there's been strong emotions, but when you were there, was there anything in particular that really caught you by surprise or really hit you emotionally?
A couple times helicopters went overhead trying to film, and then you had this crowd stop in the street and chant up at the helicopters, and it was like, I don't know, it gave me faith in humanity. Like, there was a lot of loneliness after the election. I felt suspicion about people. If I'm honest, I felt like a vote for Donald Trump was a vote against my family, and against people I love. And I get and respect having different political views. I really do. But we've reached a point where voting is not theoretical. I am afraid that my daughter will not live to be an old woman because she's black. And so having people I know and love vote for him felt personal, really personal. So, seeing that there were all of these strangers who came out of their houses into the street to say no was a huge relief. Like, I'm not alone. We're not alone. Athens is not a bubble. Atlanta is not a bubble. That there are other people and they are not going to take this lying down either.
So the drive home,
Yeah.
Did all 5 of you drive home as well?
We did, yep.
Okay.
We went all together. And I feel like we were a lot quieter on the way home because we were tired and our brains were overwhelmed. And then I'm sure we talked, but I can't remember anything we said. But we drove the next morning. Yeah, we got up early and went back and had to go back to our regular lives right away because that's what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something really weird about that, but also the march was on the tip of everybody's tongue because it had been like the whole world had reacted. It wasn't just DC, it was all of these cities. And so it was really, like, it kept going. It felt like there was huge momentum, and there was so much talk, in all of the speakers about, like, okay, that's great, you showed up here, and now what are you going to do tomorrow? Which is the God's honest truth, because all the marching in the street doesn't make a shred of difference if you're not working to elect people that are going to fight for you. And I definitely felt relief that the conversation continued when I got home. When I walked into my house, and it made me cry and cry, my husband and daughter had made a a pink cat cake for me, which, my 5-year-old did not understand that the pink hat was a reaction to a slur, which was an interesting thing to try to explain to my at the time, 10-year-old or 11-year-old, what was the significance of the pink hat. So, yes, my husband and daughters were really proud of me and made me feel very loved when I got home, and I feel really, really grateful to be married to somebody who would have been there too, but instead he was keeping the home fires burning and keeping our girls safe, and was proud of me himself. So he doesn't think that I'm a loud Yankee. He thinks that I am strong, which is good.
So, obviously your family was very supportive of you marching. Everyone else?
I'm not in contact with my parents anymore. We're estranged, but my sister and brother, my brother is, I can't tell what his politics are. That's a terrible thing to say, but I can't, and we kind of just don't touch it. My sister thinks about the way I do. She lives just outside of Boston, and my brother still lives in New York. And my in-laws were not happy with my having gone, and I love them. I'm very close to them, and they treat me like a daughter. On my photography business Instagram account, and I don't hide my politics. I don't hide my views about much. I mean, I know that when I first meet a client that I don't know them and that I should not step right in it. But at the same time, I won't pretend to be something other than what I am. I believe that love is love, and that humans can't be illegal. So I posted a picture of one of the first hats I was knitting, and that I was heading to DC, and that I loved my country, and that I was going to go and fight for it, which is genuinely what I believe. I love this country, and so I get to help define what it is. And my mother-in-law was very unhappy with the fact that I was going, and tried to get my husband to talk me out of it. And it definitely caused some real conflict. And for them, she felt that this was an abortion march, and that's how she described it. And they are single-issue voters, and they did vote for Donald Trump, which was really hard because they love both of their grandchildren. They have more than just our kids, but they love both of their grandchildren, my children, as much as a grandparent could. And I understand they are doing their best. But they were really alarmed and disappointed that I was going. And I sort of felt like, are you surprised? Have you met me? But at the same time, I did end up having a conversation that didn't really go anywhere about trying to explain why I had gone. It wasn't an abortion march, and there were people there that were adamantly anti-choice, and they were allowed to be there too. It it was a whole nother thing. We're paying attention, and we're not gonna let you take the country down the tubes. It was a reaction to misogyny and bigotry. And then I was going because I'm a mother who has to protect her children, and I felt like that was really easy to understand. And so I tried to explain this to her as carefully as I could. And in the end, I don't really think that she is in a place to hear me. I know she loves me anyway. So it's something we don't talk about. But no, everybody else in my community, because I confess that my community is a bubble, was thrilled. And had either been at the Athens March themselves, or some of them had gone to other marches, or a lot of them had been there at DC too. We didn't see each other, but they were there. So, yeah, mostly I felt like, yay, from my community.
All right, so now this is kind of interesting. Some of these interviews I started not long after the march, and now here we are, a little over a year. Compare what you wanted to happen or your hopes after with where you are now. How have they developed? How have they changed? What?
Well, I have gotten a civics education that I did not have. I mean, that's not true. I went to excellent, well-funded New York State public schools, but government classes kind of faded at some point, and so I really, really clearly know who my elected representatives are. I have them all on speed dial. After January, I had daily phone calls to all of them, which was very uncomfortable. I have some phone phobia, and I had to, at the beginning, start with scripts, and then eventually I am now perfectly comfortable calling and talking to a staffer about exactly how upset I am. So I feel like the bar keeps being moved to some extent. The rallying cry of "this is not normal" is really important, I feel like, because I feel as though things keep happening that in any other context would be considered so bizarre as to be unbelievable, but they just keep happening and being kind of quietly pushed under the rug to the extent that I don't know where we'll come out on the other end of this, if we have so fundamentally changed the way we have government in the United States that we won't recover, or maybe we will recover and come out stronger. I've been really relieved to see the recent, I think blue wave is a dangerous term, because I feel like any chance that we can become there was a belief before the election that there was no chance Hillary Clinton could not win. Like, it's okay. And I think that resting on any kind of win at this point is a dangerous thing, and that we need to be constantly applying the gas. I also feel there was a lot of conversation initially about how the desire is to make things so wild that we become tired, that the people resisting will become tired, and I have absolutely seen that, and I've seen that in myself. I do not call my elected representatives every day now. I only call them sometimes. I used to never call them, literally ever, and so yes, it's an improvement, but so I've been relieved to see women running. I've been relieved to see the people who've been elected, trans candidates, lots of people of color elected. Like, yay. This is a much better representation of the people who live in our country, which is who should be governing it. I know who's running for school board. I know who's running for all of these positions that I never considered important, and I now do. And I know that my neighbors know who's running in a way that they never did before. So that's good. Because even if people I don't like are elected, at least somebody is paying attention. I want everybody to vote, including the people whose political beliefs I disagree with. Like, by gum, this can't work if we don't vote. So I'm really nervous, but I'm also relieved also to see the checks and balances working. Sometimes they don't work in the way I like them to, but they're there. I do feel a lot of anxiety about what's going on with the Justice Department, and because that's a really important check and balance. But I don't know. We're in a funny place. This is a weird time to be alive, is kind of what I keep saying. Things keep happening that I really never could have guessed.
Yes. Now, in between time, since the march, we've had the Me Too movement, as well as the Parkland and the March for Our Lives. How have they? Do you connect those to the march?
I definitely do.
Yeah.
I think that the things that have happened since then, I mean, we're all building on each other. Like, we're going back to the civil rights movement, and all of those people did all of that hard work that made what I don't know. It all builds. It's not as though I believe the Women's March in D.C. was the trigger, and now because it's not that simple. It was, based on templates from huge marches in D.C. before then. I do feel as though the Me Too movement is definitely a reaction to the Women's March and women suddenly realizing, white women elected Donald Trump, and I'm a white woman, and I feel responsible for the fact that I didn't have conversations with women I should have had conversations with. That's on me. I have a white daughter who I talk more about privilege with her than I ever would have considered doing, and I do feel as though it's her specific responsibility to actively, within her life, push against the ills of the world. And I understand that I'm raising politically active children, which, we all joke about how we're going to become, our children will grow up to be the opposite of us, which is possible. I am not the opposite of my parents, but I'm pretty different. And so she might end up being a young Republican. And if she really believes in that, more power to her. The Me Too movement was and is encouraging hearing and watching the pushback from it as somebody who is an adult woman and has therefore experienced, all of the realities of being a woman that we just take for granted. That if, it's been interesting talking to my husband about these things and the little things that women just know how to do, like how we walk across parking lots at night, what we hold in our hands, what you do and do not do. All of them are quiet adaptations to the vulnerability of being a woman. And all of the crap that we have, I don't actually believe in a woman who hasn't experienced it, whether overt or not. So that's been good, but it's also been bad, and you get to watch the reaction to it. The victim blaming, the incredulity, the, oh God, here comes another one. The conversations around Juno Diaz that are coming out now, which it's don't read the comments. Like, don't ever read the comments. Don't I know better? I really don't know better. So, yeah. And then Parkland. My daughter was part of the Clark Middle School walkout and stood outside for 5 hours in the sun. And I was on the phone with my representatives after it happened. And I'm not a yeller. I know that I can't yell at the staff, even though I sometimes feel like yelling. And I did yell. I yelled because I had my amazing, beautiful, sweet kid come home, and she'd gotten an email from a friend talking about the shooting, and she looked at me and she said, "Is this true?" And I had to explain to her that yes, that it was a student, a former student there, and that had happened. And she was home from school that day, and then she went and rode her scooter around the neighborhood, and I had to tell her that it was going to be okay. Because, you know, we've got the script about Mr. Rogers and find the helpers, but it all feels like talk at this point, because we've said this how many times now? And the adults are going to do everything they can, and I don't actually believe that anymore. I don't believe that we are. So, to see the children rise up and say, all right, adults, you are entrusted to take care of us and you seem incapable, is beautiful and heartbreaking, because it's not their job at all, and they should be worried about prom dresses and if they got an A in AP English, and instead they're worried about if they'll die. So my daughter, while she was outside at the walkout, she'd planned to maybe go back inside after an hour and a half. Like, the school did not sanction. I'm really impressed with the school. They didn't sanction the walkout, but they supported the students' right to do so and made it safe for them. And I was really grateful. And most of the school evidently walked out. But she had planned to go in. Like, there was a period of time that the school had set aside for it to happen. And then they wanted them to go back in and resume classes. And I totally get it. And while she's outside, one of the kids had their cell phone, and they heard about the shooting that had just happened that day. And she stood out there and cried, and she was furious. And she was like, I'm not going back in. And she didn't. She stayed there. So I'm really, really proud of her. I'm really proud of all of those children. I told her it was entirely up to her whether she did it or not, that I would support her. I would support it if there were ramifications as a result from the school. But I'm also really heartbroken. She's a kid who still plays with dolls. I mean, she stood out there in the sweater I knitted her that has like a unicorn pin on it, and she packed her lunch in like her green bag that has little animals all over it. Like, she's a little kid. I mean, I grew up post-Columbine. I was in school, I was in high school when Columbine happened. I remember standing outside over and over again because there were lots of false alarms. And I remember being afraid of my classmates. Like, what might they do? And yeah, so it's weird to feel this helpless as a parent, to have my kids go to school every day, and like, it shouldn't feel so weighty. I should be able to be testy with them because they didn't put their cereal bowls in the sink, and instead I feel as though I'm powerless. But maybe the kids will make it all right. Like this is new. So maybe we can unshackle ourselves from lobbyists. I don't know. It's felt more possible now than ever before.
Well, that sounds like a fantastic note to end on. Did you have anything else I might have thought?
No, I don't think so.
Cool.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Well, you absolutely touched on a nerve. My daughter was in Columbine. At the time was in school. She was very young. I think she's 37, so she's about 10 years younger than you. And I just remember the conversation. She came home, and she's like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn the desk over, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going would do that. And I was like, oh my
Yes,
God.
exactly. Exactly. Lockdown drills are maybe the most upsetting thing I can imagine.
Yeah.
My 5-year-old enters kindergarten in the fall, and I mean,
Yeah, how do you...
yeah. And I told Adeline, like, you do what they tell you to do. And I had to explain, why you cooperate with that drill. Which is just beyond the pale. Beyond the pale. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you.